Asha. She was the blood of the Kraken, daughter of the Lord Reaper of Pike. But that mattered little today. There's no sea for 100 leagues, Asha thought as she took a moment to gauge the lay of the land. That land was white. The snow was still falling and had blanketed the village, the camp, the frozen lakes. All around, everything looked empty and clean, like a fresh sheet of parchment waiting to be filled. Filled with blood. Her uncle Roderick had told her history was written blood, or something like that. But who would ever read this bit? The bit with Balon Greyjoy's daughter. How could anyone? Whatever was put down in this morning light would be buried by midday. Forgotten. Most daughters were, she knew, but she was not most daughters. Most daughters wouldn't be here, axe in hand, fighting for a demon, drown me for a fool. The Southerners were given the right wing. The enemy had cavalry, Benjicout Branch reported, so the men were armed with spears, forming rank on rank of steel hoarfrost. Under a fiery heart banner heavy with snow, Sir Richard Horpe held the command from atop a grey palfrey. As thin as his horse was, it was one of the healthier ones, taken from the lot the Bravosi banker had brought. The moths on Sir Richard's shield were caked over with ice, but here and there other men's heraldry showed. The swordfish of Bar Emmon, the turtle of Estermont, the seahorse of Valarian. Big Bucket Wool led the left. Behind his shaggy Garen stood hundreds of spears from his own clan, clad in fur and mail, with bear paws lashed to their boots. Farther back were Norries and Knots, Harclays and Littles, Burleys and Flints. This morning, the quarrelsome Northerners looked almost like an army. But can they fight like one? A rank of spears required obedience and discipline, yet Northmen were accustomed to seek glory on the battlefield, each man his own. She could only hope it wasn't their undoing. The middle was Arthur Karstark's. Stannis had given the traitor's son a chance to prove himself, against the counsel of his second. Banners with a white sunburst sprouted up amongst the 1,200 spearmen, though only 1 in 3 soldiers was truly sworn to Carhold. Let no man call Stannis unwary. It was more faithful clansmen who were the bulk of the army, 1 on each shoulder of the Karstark men. To her eyes, however, they all looked about the same. The king led from the rear, as Greenland commanders were wont to do. There, the paltry reserve gathered around him. 200 mounted knights and Northmen. Asha and her 6 Ironborn were with them, though only Christopher Botley and Rogan looked comfortable a horse. From their islet, they would watch the carnage unfold before them, and ride to where they were needed. If our mounts don't die when put to spur. In truth, they couldn't see very far. Their islet was scarcely higher than a stage, and snow was a curtain dropped over the world. The woods beyond the crofters' village were hidden, as was the far side of camp and the king's tower. Even the flame atop it was gone. The foe might have passed right by them, and none the wiser, like a reaver overlooking prey on a starless night. If it weren't for the pyre. To the right of the reserve, the fire still roared, its garish flames matching the heart inlaid on Stannis' breastplate. His helm had been affixed with 2 weirwood branches, giving him what looked like a pair of stag's antlers. The wood had been cut from the tree on the left, its face as pale and stern as the king's. Here I am between 2 gods, and neither of them mine. The sacrifice these gods demanded had made a rousing show. True to his word, Stannis had swung the sword himself. It was just as a Stark of Winterfell would have done, she reminded him. The blade had danced with blinding light as it sliced through that scrawny neck. Before the weirwood, blood sprayed out, as red as summer cherries. The Northmen roared with delight. Then, Sir Godry Faring and Sir Corlys Penny fed the body to the flames, the king himself chucking on the fallen head. To that, the Southerners cheered. Now, the snow by the weirwood was white again. Still hungry, is it? Da-da! Da-da! A trumpet sounded somewhere to the east, harsh and angry. "Fight hard today, cunt," Sir Clayton Suggs said as he rode up beside her. Like you're mad with moonblood. Cunt. Even now. If Suggs said it because he liked the way contempt looked on Asha's face, her helm robbed him of that pleasure this time. I can give you a bloody gash yourself, if it'll give strength to your arm. She twirled her axe. Suggs laughed, but said no more. He closed his visor, and Asha did the same. It was time. Out of the snowy haze, there came a horse. Then 5, then 50, then 500, with 1,000 men-at-arms beside. They were here. The leader of the enemy wore silvered plate and mail, inlaid with details of lapis lazuli. The crest of his war helm was tall, fashioned in the shape of the twin towers of House Frey. His shield bore those same towers, quartered with the snakes of Page and the tree and ravens of Blackwood. Before him rode the banner-bearers. One bore the stag and lion standard of King Tommen, another the twin towers. The third brandished a bloody head, impaled upon the point of a tall spear. An old man's head it was, white-bearded and one-eyed. The spear was 8 feet long, made of a pale wood, almost white. Drippings of flesh along its upper shaft had frozen there, dark and red. Crow-food umber, Asha knew. The old Northman had fought to his death, it seemed. Perhaps the foe had thought the sight of the severed head would strike terror in the hearts of Stannis' men. As if in answer, it was Kahl the maid who began the reaving song, bold as you please. 4-foot mire only pays the iron price. For bread'll trade a dagger's blade and a dirk's to play at dice. Them girls at the docks, he only gives 'em lice. He'll snatch your water, then snatch your daughter, and the drowned god'll snatch your life. His voice echoed in her helm, high and sweet as a peach. Asha, Rook, and Grimtongue joined for the second round. The third brought in Rogan and Trisopher Botley, and Fingers with a low harmony. This was how Ironborn faced fear, with song and jest. Each of the voices heartened Asha, but they filled her with sorrow as well. It was like to be their last melody together, and her own final song. She had forgotten to savor that last summer peach. Like a fool, she had thought there was another one on the morrow. Not this time. Not ever again. She resolved to savor his voice. But there was no time left even for that. The king, squinting down at the foe's advance, gave his signal, and now his trumpets were the ones that blared. Da-da, da-da, da-da! Thousands of battle cries rang out, and the armies charged. They rushed together like waves in a storm, filling the air with a spray of snow. The sounds of steel and wood rolled across the battlefield as each man struck and fell in turn. The mob snarled and shouted and screamed. Each side pushed and lunged and stabbed. Armor was pierced. Men died. New men rushed to fill the gaps. The sea of humanity churned. But for all of its writhing, it wasn't coming to sweep her away just yet. Somehow, Stannis' feeble, half-starved army had not broken at first touch. Perhaps it was their courage, or their fear, or their faith in gods appeased by blood, but for the nonce, they kept their ranks. The wall held. Asha knew what was next. Battle is water, the old Ironborn saying went. It washes around what lies before it. And there they went. Frey knights and free riders were looping wide around their front's left side. They mean to flank Wool. It was to be expected. This was the main role of cavalry in a pitched battle after all. But that didn't mean the move was foolish. Would that we had enough riders to do the same. Still, if Wool's men had trained a day with a spear, they'd know how to pivot and face a flanking charge. At the front of the Frey riders was the knight with Crowfood's head. He was a large man, made larger by the heavy steel plate he wore. In fact, Asha had seldom seen a man his size. Rolf the dwarf had been imposing, and Red Tide had a crew with some towering thralls from Soth. But this knight outsized them all. Could Andric the Unsmiling be rivaled by this headsman? He flicked his spear, and the head took to the air. A moment later, it struck a clansman's shield before disappearing in the snow. Then, The headsman couched the spear as he might a lance, and swerved sharply towards the middle of the column, where the Littles stood. The clansmen turned and roared even as the Frey riders barreled towards them. The column's side had become a front, a briar hedge of tangled spears. Undaunted, the headsman never slowed, nor did the riders behind him. At the last moment, the headsman's destrier leapt impossibly high, its legs emerging from the snow to clear the whole first row of spears. Hooves met helms with a sickening crunch, and the armored horse kept going, trampling men beneath it as it went. The giant of Frey stabbed and skewered furiously, finding neck after neck with his bloody spear. The knight's trailing riders swarmed through the brake, slashing as they went. The horses collected shafts in their bellies. Some fell, but their bodies served to shield the riders behind them. The advance pushed deeper, digging through spears and men towards its target. Morgan Little, the one they call Middle. A middle son. Asha's brother Merrin had been one too. He was never as strong as Roderick, never as beautiful as Theon, and never as dear to their mother's sight as either. That last was what ate away at him, like brine to iron. He tried to hide his woe with japes and wicked grins, but it was a threadbare cloak. Asha had loved him, despite his weakness, and turned a blind eye to his cruelty. She'd even admired that wit of his, and tried to match it as best she could. But what do clever words win you on the Iron Isles? Chortles and half-smiles, mayhaps, but not respect. No, not that, and certainly not a Kingsmoot. Desperate for a high deed to call his own, Merrin had lined up at the southern wall of Pike during the siege. There he died. So it was for Morgan Little. The tower didn't crush him, but it might as well have been. He ran at the headsman with a battle-axe in each hand, hoping for a glimpse of glory before his death. He glimpsed a spear's point instead. The fall of their chief panicked the Littles. Some turned and ran at once. Others tried, but their bear paws tripped over each other as they turned. They broke. They scrambled. They tumbled to the snow. Piles of tangled bodies littered the field like cod in a net. The Freys only had to gut them. "There!" Triss called out, pointing. A dozen riders had lingered behind from the headsman's charge, and now they were heading farther down the side of the column. Towards us. The riders reared their horses and stopped, but only to lift bows from their saddles' pommels. "Archers!" Soon enough, they'd loosed a volley. As one, the reserve lifted their shields, with Sir Corlys Penny moving to protect the king. A shaft appeared at his shield's face, at the very center of the painted coin. Beside Stannis, Brandon Norrie's mount squealed. An arrow lodged in its leg. "Cobb, scatter them!" the king commanded. "Take Suggs, Clifton, the Iron Men." Iron Men. Stannis most like had not meant her, but Asha spurred her stot with the rest. Sir Harry's Cobb bounded ahead to lead the sortie, a cloud of white trailing him like a loose sail. Sir Humphrey Clifton, Rogan, and Christopher Botley fell in behind him, following the trough he had dug through the snow. Asha did the same, but for all her spurs she found herself lagging behind, with Sir Clayton close at her rear. Others take me. I'm riding a corpse. Karl the Maid and the rest of her men were also struggling with their mounts, and fell far behind even her. The Ironborn charge was more a trickle. As they neared the archers, Asha could see they were lightly armored, with livery of pink. Boltons, she thought at first. But that was no flayed man on their surcoats. No, it's a heron. The sigil was foreign to her, but it made no matter. They were cowardly birds, spooked at the mere sight of a fowler. How long until this flock takes flight? It never did. Rather than reeling their horses around, the heron knights stood resolute. The archers knocked, drew, and loosed a second volley at the king on his eyelet. They'd like to be the raven's teeth, Asha thought. They want the glory of slaying a king and ending a war themselves. But that was never how it went in truth. Kings always had sons to avenge them. Or daughters, or brothers, or cousins' grandsons. Not to mention the commanders, the bannermen, the lowly small folk who remembered their kings so fondly. They all lived on and whelped. Thus so did war. It was Sir Harry's who struck the first blow, sending an arm flying that still clutched its bow. Rogan stabbed a second archer in the neck, while Triss hacked at a heron who'd traded his bow for a shield. Asha let one of her battle axes fly. It lodged in the skull of a man who had knocked an arrow her way. Sir Humphrey gutted one who had drawn. It wasn't enough. The remaining archers all turned their aim. They loosed. Without a thought, the axe in her left hand rose. Ding! A heartbeat later, Sir Clayton raced past her with 3 arrows in his shield. She spurred her mount to follow, but the stot only made a sickly sound that was more bray than whinny. Her heels pounded helplessly on horse flesh as she looked about her. To her left, Christopher Botley and Sir Harry still struck at herons. No one had loosed any arrows at them, or they'd missed if they had. Others weren't so lucky. A little past them, Sir Humphrey lay in the snow with feathers jutting between his helm and gorget. Rogan was dead farther on, an arrow in his chest. Had her horse been hit too, or was it dying of its own accord? Your strength is your ship, the Ironborn said. Stay upon it. Unless it's sinking. She had no choice. Asha Greyjoy dismounted into the snow. It rose past her knees, deeper than she'd expected, and thicker too. Just as she began to trudge forward, she flinched. A rider plowed past her. "One!" he screamed. Grimtongue. Her eyes found Sir Humphrey's erstwhile mount stamping without its rider. Not dead yet. We're kindred, aren't we? All of us who are still alive? She pushed toward it as fast as she could, the snow heavy at her shins. Despite her shivers, her legs burned. Then, all at once, she felt dizzy. She retched. 2! Grimtongue called out. 3! Seasick, that's all. The vomit steamed in the cold air, and just beyond it, she saw the flower. It had sprouted before her in the snow so suddenly. Its stem was straight, its petals blue as a jay's feathers. A winter rose. That was a queer thought. Before her uncle Aeron turned to pious prattling, he'd once told her the tale of Baal the Bard. A wildling song, he'd boasted, sung to him by a salt wife from the frozen shore. The story was a bad one. A daughter was kidnapped by a trickster king, only to have their bastard rise to power. What was there to gather from that? It'd make a better story if the woman was the trickster, Asha had always thought. If only she had been the schemer, who'd seduced the king for her own reasons. Just then, she saw the rose for what it truly was, and her eyes went wide. Asha whirled around, found the archer, and let her axe fly. It missed him completely, yet the man's head was cleaved from his shoulders all the same. 4! Came Grimtongue's scream, and a wash of relief with it. Is that all? Asha grinned weakly at him, then retched again. By the time Asha mounted her new horse, she was good and cold, but that was nothing. Battle will warm up anyone. She found one of her axes in the skull of the first archer, slumped over but still a horse. Only when she collected it did the corpse seem to realize it was dead and fall from the saddle. The other axe was lost in the snow, most like till spring. Now that she had a view of the battlefield again, she could tell at once that they were losing. The headsman and his riders had reached the Karstark men at the heart of Stannis' defense. That, in turn, had weakened the support for the front. There the Frey footmen were advancing, pushing back clansmen and Karstark alike. Only Horp's right was still in formation. But there was more peril beyond them. In the distance, she spotted more mounted knights in reserve, waiting beneath a blue-green banner. The Manderleys were doomed. What were they to do now? There were but 6 Ironborn and 2 Southern knights. To join the fighting from here would be nothing but a quick death. They could return to Stannis' Worm Hill, but to what end? A slower death instead. They would yield with the king and be flayed with him in kind. That left only desertion. They could try to outrun Sir Clayton and Sir Harrys and all those Manderley knights, mayhaps ride for Torrhen Square. No, at best they'd all freeze come nightfall. Then she spotted him. The commander. Marked by his twin tower helm, he sat alone, not 300 feet away from her, his riders all before him in the thick of the battle, leading from the rear. It was a stroke of fortune so grand she could scarce believe it. Were she to capture him, the tide could turn, not just for the battle, but for her life. In her mind's eye, she could already see it. Atop the islet, with Lightbringer at his throat, the Frey commander would order his men to drop their arms. The day would be won, and they'd all know she had won it. King Stannis most of all. And who'd ever seen a sweeter scowl than the one he'd wear for her then? "With me!" She spurred her new horse and was off, not even looking back to see whether anyone had listened. Through the snow, the horse pushed towards the commander, whose gaze was fixed on the battle. "He doesn't see me." His horse did. With a panicked squeal, the mount wheeled around and made off with her prize. The commander clung to the pommel of his saddle, screaming all the way. She wasn't about to let him escape. Asha leaned low over her horse's neck as she thundered in pursuit, eyes locked on the commander, even as clumps of snow sprayed up before her. His horse, well fed and fresh by comparison, should have been pulling away with ease, yet the gap between them closed with every sickly grunt of the beast she rode. He lacks control of his mount, or is a poor rider, some up-jumped knight. Her horse let out a terrible cough, then sucked in fiercely for air. "Live! For both our sakes, live!" Asha gripped her axe, ready to strike. Him too, she reminded herself, and spun the axe butt forward. The commander looked back. She swung. Dong! The axe struck true, ringing the rider's helm like a ship's fog bell. The helm's towers shattered, its visor ripped from its hinges, and the man toppled sideways. He crashed headfirst into the white, burying him from helm to codpiece while his horse rode on. Asha pulled her own mount to stop, her chest heaving, her pulse in her ears. She wheeled around to see two legs kicking helplessly out of the snow. Then it hit her, a surge of triumph so fierce it brought a wild grin to her lips. "A fine chase," Christopher Botley bellowed as he rode up, "and a fine trophy." As it turned out, he and Fingers were the only ones who'd followed her. "Dig him out," Asha commanded. "The more we dawdle, the more men die." She tried to sound stern, but there was no masking the joy in her voice. Her men vaulted from their saddles and did as she bid. From beneath the snow came a high-pitched squeal. Only after they dug a foot down could she make out what the knight was saying. "I yield!" "And so will your men." There would be more songs today after all. The sooner she got the knight back to Stannis, the sooner this battle would be over, and the sooner the men could get to singing them. On the morrow she would crack! The sound was loud and crisp. A storm, she thought. But that was wrong. She knew thunder. There was a long moment when the world seemed to stop for Asha Greyjoy. She turned towards the battlefield, letting her eyes take a good long blink. In the darkness, she felt her stomach twist. She swallowed and fought the urge to retch again. When her eyes opened, all she could do was gape. The armies had stopped fighting. The battle, the war, forgotten. The fronts, the spears, the archers, the mounted men, they didn't matter anymore, nor the houses, lords, or kings they'd marched up here to crown. Any hatred these men felt for one another was wiped away, like supper's leavings before a soapy rag. In that moment, all was silent, save the wind and the falling snow. A moment. How long was it? A second? 5? 1,000 years. However long this new peace reigned, no joy attended it. What these Greenland men felt, they might have named shock, or dread, or terror. But Asha knew better. They felt the summons of the drowned god. Asha felt it too. She had never been so cold. All the horses squealed at once. The headsman jerked his reins hard, desperate to control his mount, and in an eye blink, he vanished with a splash. Other Freys began dropping from view nearby, then more farther out. One by one, faster and faster, like the start of rainfall. There was another crack, then another, The men had dropped their arms, all of them rushing outward from a growing void. They were pushing, shoving, toppling over, trying to run, trying to escape. Mass panic. The earth quaked, and the snow around them moved, shifted, took to the air. Then she could see it, a giant split in the frozen lake that lay beneath the blanket of snow. With a terrible moan, it yawned open, like the mouth of a massive white whale. Men fell, men slid toward it, men were swallowed. A few managed to grasp the ice at the lip of the opening, but the weight of their armor pulled them down, and all too soon, their arms gave out. Cracks grew this way and that, etched black against the ice. They took the shape of lightning, spreading faster than any horse could gallop, and with them came thunderous creaks and snaps and breaks. It was a chorus of terror, as if the winter lake were singing to them in some unintelligible tongue. A song of mockery. Sheets of ice broke off from the rest. Men clung on, but the ice sank under their weight like overloaded skiffs. Some stayed afloat, the larger sheets, but they pitched and rolled, men tumbling off with each and every sway. No gunwales to keep them from going overboard. A great slab of ice began to tilt, one side lifting out of the lake. Men scrambled up the rising side, trying to balance it with their weight, but the snow had no such aim. It slid ponderously down to the sinking side, weighing it down further until the slab was too steep to stand on. As the men lost their footing and tumbled into the water below, the ice stood upright for all to see, its underside pocked with 1,000 fishing holes. Then it capsized, falling with a great slap against the lake. A frigid wave rose up and splashed a group of knights at the water's edge. They squealed like maids. Kahl. Asha scanned the tumult as her heels spurred her horse. Where was he? The cracks had reached as far as they'd faced the archers. The site of their battle was in pieces, like the strewn tiles of an aged mosaic. She spotted a headless heron at the water's edge amongst a scattering of arrows. And there was her old horse's corpse, adrift on a chunk of ice twice its size. There were others too, survivors fleeing the crumbling lake. Frays gingerly crept across islands of ice, following the routes of those before them. Clansmen had formed chains of men to tow others to safety. Horses found their own way, every one of them abandoned. But she saw no Ironborn. Kahl! She screamed. Her voice was drowned out by the drowning. Where is he? Had he gotten away to safety? Had his lame horse even carried him this far? Lady Asha! Somehow this cry, amongst all the others, reached her ears. Was it the maid? For a moment she swelled with hope. And there... No. Suggs. He gripped a ledge of ice, his lower body in the water. His helmet had fallen off somehow, so all could see his ugly face. His skin was pale, his lips blue, his eyes pleading. Bugger him. Asha returned to her search. Lady Asha! He called again. Bugger him. He was cruel and weak, a pathetic creature that was best put down. She thought of her brother. You have to know your name. Bugger him! He was like to die anyway. For some reason, she found herself dismounting. Lady Asha. She planted her feet, grabbed his arm, and hoisted him up like an anchor. It was then, beneath the water, that Asha glimpsed the maid. Later, much later, Asha found herself huddled by a fire between Fingers and Tris Botley, a plate of green mush in her lap. How she'd gotten there, she couldn't say. She had a dim memory of kneeling and screaming and shivering violently. She was still shivering violently. The battle was well and over, they told her. Most of the Frey soldiers, the ones who survived, yielded to what remained of Sir Richard's men-at-arms. Those who fled were ridden down by the Manderley Knights. Lord Wyman had turned his cloak and was stabbed for it at Winterfell, some said. Others claimed he had only pretended to love Roose Bolton from the start. Whichever tale was true, they all agreed the fat men's men now answered to the king. The Frey commander, Asha managed through chattering teeth. Did we... He was no commander, my lady, Tris told her. Only a squire. A boy, no more than 10. Fingers shifted uncomfortably. When we took off his helmet, his face was mangled from the blow. His cheekbone was shattered. An eye ripped from its socket. Asha moved to retch, but her stomach was as vacant as her stare. Only a bit of bile came up, so she spit a green glob of it into the fire. It sizzled, and she slid closer to the flames. Their fire was one of 100, giving the survivors respite. Still, there were 1,000 men who wouldn't warm, Tris Botley told her, their humors too frozen to thaw. Twice as many men would lose fingers or toes tonight, and others whole limbs. Sir Clayton Suggs himself had a foot sawed off by the maester. Despite the suffering, more cheers than moans rang through the camp. For the first time in months, the men were feasting. There was more than enough peas porridge from the Frey's baggage train, turnips and carrots too. They were small and black, but every man was allowed 2 of each. And they dragged enough horses from the lake for them to eat their fill of steak for a dozen meals. Queen's men pulled corpses from the lake too. The ones in the shallows at least, recounted Fingers. They had good armor, the Moth Knights said. And that giant fucker wanted to burn him for his red god. Half these fires are for that fervent nonsense. Not our Ironborn, he assured her. They never found Rogan or Grimtongue, but Rook and Kahl got pulled out. The king has given us leave to return them back to the water. The lake feeds a river, Christopher Botley said, and all rivers lead to the sea. When she found the strength, they were lent mount and escorted to the lake shore by Sir Harry Cobb, Sir Ormond Wilde, and a dozen Manderley knights. Bundled up in furs, Asha gazed at the sky above as they rode. The snow had stopped at last, and she could see the stars staring back at her from gaps in the clouds. The lake had frozen over again, and was now a jagged field of ice, glimmering in the starlight. At its edge, the bodies of their fallen friends had been brought before them, resting beneath a thick blanket of wool and a thin dusting of snow. By the king's command, 4 men stood sentry, stamping and fidgeting to shoo away the cold. Asha Greyjoy had attended hundreds of funerals. Men died at sea, thralls and captains alike. Some gloriously in battle, others from flux or fever. But they died. All men die. In her experience, every funeral was different. Some were rowdy and drunken, others solemn and sober. But all of them were quick. The Ironborn were not sentimental folk. Let them descend to the Drowned God's watery halls, Asha said once they'd arrived, to feast and dance and laugh until the seas dry up. She could have said more, but not without her voice cracking. Kahl the maid had been her shipmate, her boon companion, her lover of 7 years. But never her husband. No. I'm the blood of the Kraken, daughter of the Lord Reaper of Pike. They removed the blankets and dragged the bodies to the fresh hole they'd chopped in the ice. Rook's corpse was first. It slid into the water with a soft splash before sinking under the weight of his rusted mail. For Kahl the maid, Asha forced herself to take one last look at him, to gaze upon his boyish cheeks. But they were already gone. Icicles had bearded his face.